Welcome to Conversations at the Crossroads, the podcast where spirituality meets the beautifully messy experience of being human. I'm Jenny, a tarot reader, a Reiki practitioner, witch mentor, hairstylist, and the voice behind Conversations at the Crossroads. Each week, we gather here at the Crossroads to explore spirituality, personal growth, and tools that help us navigate our ever-evolving human journey. Some conversations will dive into the mystical, other into the practical, and sometimes we'll sit together through the hard stuff. Along the way, we may explore ideas that challenge us, stories that shift our perspective, or practices that help us walk our path with a little more intention. So, wherever you're listening from, take a breath, settle in, and join me at the crossroads. Picture a mother standing in a doorway, watching someone rip her child out of her arms. She has no weapon, she has no lawyer, no police she can call, no system that will protect her, because the system is the thing that's doing the ripping. All she has is her voice, her hands, her ancestors, and whatever she remembers of the old ways passed down to her in secret. So she prays. And some of what she prays for isn't gentle. I want you to sit with that image for a second, because today we're talking about something that makes a lot of people in the spiritual community squirm a bit. We're talking about baneful magic. And if you're listening without captions, that's Baneful, not painful magic. Hexing, cursing, binding, the stuff nobody wants to admit that they've thought about doing to the person who hurt them. And by the end of this episode, I want you to walk away with understanding that baneful magic is not the villain of the story. Sometimes it's the only justice available. So let's start with the word itself. Baneful. Baneful. It comes from bane, which just means something that causes harm, ruin, or death. In witchcraft, baneful magic is any working done with the intent to cause a consequence or to banish, to bind, to hex, to fiercely protect enough that the thing being protected against actually stops. Here's where I gently want to correct a misconception, because I hear it constantly, even from people who've been on their path for years. Baneful magic is not the same thing as quote-unquote black magic. That term, black magic versus white magic, love and light versus evil, it's a lie that we've been sold. Magic isn't black or white. It's not good or evil sitting on two separate shelves. Magic is a spectrum, and where any working lands on that spectrum depends entirely on the intent behind it and context. I want you to think about the things you've probably already done that technically count as baneful magic without you ever calling it that. Have you ever done a cord cutting? Ever severed an energetic tie to an ex, a toxic friend, a situation that kept looping back into your life? That is baneful magic. You're banishing something. You're causing it to rupture on purpose. Have you ever put up a protection working around your home, your business, your body, salt across a threshold, a witch's ladder tied with intention to hold something back, a jar buried under your porch to trap harmful energy sent your way and reflect it back to the sender? All of that is baneful. It's magic that says no, full stop, no, 100%, period. None of that is malicious. None of that makes you a dark witch or a bad person. It makes you someone who has boundaries and the will to enforce them. And that's the whole point of this episode. Baneful doesn't mean evil. It does mean effective. Before we go any further, I want to slow all the way down and really sit inside this word and get understanding of it. Because I don't want anybody walking away from this episode thinking that this was just an instruction booklet on how to do baneful magic or a history lesson on different cultures that have used it. I want people to really get an understanding and depth of what it is and how it is just a tool. Baneful magic is so much bigger and so much older than most people think of. And it belongs to almost every culture on Earth in one form or another. I want you to have a full picture before we narrow in. Let's crack open the word. We already said baneful comes from bane, and bane traces back to the Old English word bana, meaning killer or slayer. You hear that same root in plant names like wolf's bane and hen's bane, plants that are used quite literally to kill. So bane at that root is the power to end something, not always a person. Sometimes a pattern, sometimes a tie, sometimes a season of your life that needed to die so something else could live. But I do want you to also look into another piece hiding inside of that, because a lot of people skip right past it. And that's the root ban, as in banish. And ban has this incredible double life in its own history. It comes from the old root bannen, and it means both to proclaim, to summon, to call out publicly, and also to curse, to prohibit, to cast out. That's where we get banish. That's also where we get the term bans, like marriage bans, and as in a public proclamation. Same root, two directions. A ban can call something in, it can cast something out. Sit with that for a second, because that's the entire architecture of baneful magic in one word. It's the power to summon or the power to send away, and sometimes it's both in the same working. This is where binding and banishing come in as the two core mechanics of baneful magic, and I want you to understand them as two sides of one coin, not opposites. Binding is about restraint. You're not destroying something, you're containing it. Think of a binding spell like putting up a wall around a specific behavior. You bind an abuser's ability to reach you without necessarily wishing them harm beyond that containment. Banishing is different. Banishing is about removal. You're not containing the thing, you're pushing it out entirely, cutting the tie, closing the door. Both are baneful. Both take real will. And this is exactly why protection wards sit at the threshold between the two. A ward doesn't just sit there passively. It's actively binding what tries to cross it and banishing what shouldn't be let near. Protection lives right on that edge. And speaking of thresholds, if you caught my last episode, referring to the witch's threshold, you know that I spent real time on the tools and the symbols and the spellcraft that make up the foundation of this path. Today is kind of a continuation of that doorway metaphor, because baneful magic itself is a threshold. It's a place where protection and consequence meet, where boundary and hex become the same gesture depending on which direction you're facing. Which brings me to something a lot of people have asked in regards to my business, and why did I name my business Hex and Hair? A hex isn't inherently a curse. It's actually a misunderstanding baked in how the word got used in pop culture. Hex comes from a German word meaning witch, and hexen meaning practice witchcraft. A hex at its root just means a witch is working. It's not automatically malevolent. It's just magic done by a witch. That's it. You can actually see that duality still alive today in hex signs. Those are painted symbols you'll see on Pennsylvania Dutch barns, which aren't curses at all. They're protection and luck painted right there out in the open. So when I named this business Hex and Hair, I wasn't naming it after cursing. I was naming it after the craft itself, the witching, the working, both the protective and fierce sides of it, sitting right there next to something as intimate as doing somebody's hair. Both things, I believe, are extremely empowering. Being able to have sovereignty over the energy you're putting out into the world and sovereignty in how you feel about yourself and your identity and how you present yourself to the world. I think they go together beautifully. And really, when you break it down and look at it, it shows how deeply I feel about what it is that I do for a living and how important that work is to liberate and empower the people that I work with. Now, I promised you the bigger picture before we narrow in on any one tradition, so let's take a quick tour, because open, non-closed practices have been doing baneful magic for as long as people have had enemies, storms, illness, and grief. It's not a niche practice. This is ancient and it's everywhere. In ancient Greece and Rome, people wrote what were called curse tablets or depictions. They were thin sheets of lead inscribed with a person's name and a specific request, often to bind a rival in a court case, or slow down a competitor in a race, or stop a lover from straying, and then folded up, pierced with a nail, and thrown into a well, a grave, or a sacred spring. Archaeologists have pulled thousands of these out of the ground. This wasn't rare. This was common practice, openly known and openly used. In Norse tradition, there's a whole vocal magical practice called galder. Chanted or sung runic formulas used for healing, protection, cursing, and binding, all in the same toolkit, because to the Norse mind, those were never separate categories to begin with. The runes themselves carried both blessing and curse, depending entirely on how they were worked and who was working them. Across the British Isles and Europe, cunning folk, the village healers, and charm workers were routinely hired to do baneful work. Witch bottles buried under hearths to trap and reflect harm back to whoever sent it, like the first return to sender spells. Poppets bound or pierced to hold a pattern in place, which poppets are little dolls, by the way. Not magic, tying up energy for later release or permanent banishing. None of this was hiding in the shadows. This was just a Tuesday. I'm telling you all this because I want it crystal clear in your mind before we go any further. The idea that hexing and cursing are inherently evil, foreign, or quote-unquote other is a relatively recent invention. And it absolutely was not the original story. Baneful magic is a human birthright practiced openly by people all over the world long before anyone slapped the label black magic onto it. So when we turn our attention towards hoodoo and voodoo in a moment, I don't want you hearing that this is where baneful magic comes from, because it's not. I want you hearing it as one profoundly important, specific, and deeply painful chapter in a much older and much wider human history. So, if baneful magic isn't inherently evil, why do so many of us flinch at the word? Why does mainstream media only ever show cursing as something a villain does right before they get punished for it? a lot of that comes down to how colonial and Christian frameworks flattened every non-European spiritual practice into two boxes: acceptable or demonic. And nowhere is that more obvious and more painful in the way hoodoo and voodoo get talked about. I want to slow down here because this history matters and it doesn't get taught nearly enough. Voodoo, Voodoo, more accurately spelled Vodou, is a full religion. It has its own cosmology. It has its own spirits called the Loa, its own priesthood, its own initiation structures. It developed primarily in Haiti, born from West African spiritual traditions, most notably from the Fon and Yu people of what's now Benin, carried across the Atlantic in the holds of slave ships by people who were never supposed to be allowed to keep anything of who they were. Hoodoo is different. Hoodoo is a folk magic practice, not a religion, but it grew primarily in the American South, and it's not tied to one single faith. In fact, most hoodoo practitioners historically practiced Christianity alongside it, which makes sense because Christianity was often the only religion enslaved people were permitted to practice at all. Think about what that actually means. People were stolen from their homelands, stripped of their language, their names, their gods, their family, their ceremonies, and then handed exactly one book and told that this is the only spiritual container you're allowed to have. Enslaved people were forbidden to learn to read in most of the American South. Literacy itself was criminalized for them. And yet the Bible became, for many, one of the only texts they were permitted to hold, to hear read aloud, to build a spiritual life around, even while it was also being weaponized against them to justify their own bondage. So what did they do? They did what oppressed people have always done. They took the tools that were given and the tools they smuggled through memory, through songs, through the body, and through whispered fragments of their traditions their grandmothers carried, and they built something new. Psalms got used the way old incantations once were. Roots, candles, and condition oils sat right alongside scripture. Ancestor veneration wove itself into Sunday prayer. That fusion is hoodoo. I want to be crystal clear about something, and that this is important both ethically and educationally. Hoodoo and voodoo are closely related. They share ancestry, but they're not exactly the same practice. And I'm not going to teach either one to you as something you can just pick up and start doing. Both are what are called closed practices. Hoodoo belongs to African American communities specifically, carrying forward a lineage of cultural survival. Voodoo is an initiatory religion, meaning you don't self-initiate your way into it. You're brought in through actual lineage and ceremony by people within the tradition. What I can do, and what I think is actually more important, is help you understand their history, their context, and why they deserve your respect rather than Halloween costume. And here's the part I really need you to hear. The term black magic itself carries racial undertone, whether people realize it or not. Black associated with evil, dangerous, feared. White associated with pure, safe, good. That binary maps disturbingly well onto how colonizers described the very cultures they were trying to erase. Voodoo dolls, hex signs, quote-unquote witch doctors, all of that language got built specifically to make Black and indigenous spiritual practices look savage and threatening, while European ceremonial magic got dressed up as scholarly and respectable. Moving away from calling ourselves love and light practitioners. Not because we don't value light, we do, but the love and light framing keeps that same old black and white binary alive. It says that only soft, comfortable, palatable magic counts as legitimate, and everything else gets quietly coded as dangerous, primitive, other. When we do that, we're not just being precious about semantics. We're participating in the same marginalization that's been aimed at closed and diasporic practices for centuries. Magic is a spectrum. It always has been. Protecting that truth protects real people, not just our own comfort. So let's go back to the mother in the doorway. I want to talk about why hexing, cursing, and baneful workings sometimes aren't just understandable, they're righteous. Here's an analogy I use a lot, and I use it because it works. Think about the last superhero movie you watched. The villain has done something unforgivable. He's hurt someone innocent, maybe killed someone we love in the story, and then the hero finally gets their hands on them, and something happens to them. Maybe he falls, maybe he gets what's coming to him, and what does the entire theater do? They cheer. Maybe not out loud, but inside they're going, yes, they got the bad guy. Nobody's clutching their pearls about whether the hero's method were spiritually pure. We feel in our bones that justice just happened. Now take that same feeling and put it in the hands of someone who has actually lived through unimaginable harm. Someone whose people were being hunted, whipped, sold, raped, murdered, and with absolutely zero legal recourse. No courts that would hear them. No police that would protect them. Their only weapon was the spirit world and whatever magic they managed to keep alive in secret. If that person worked a hex on the overseer who tortured their family, are we really going to sit here and call that evil? Or are we finally willing to admit that sometimes magic aimed at harm is actually magic aimed at justice? And those two things can be the exact same working. This is where personal ethics get so important. And it's also exactly why I never want to hand anyone a rule book and say, this is always fine and this is always wrong. What's righteous for one person's exact circumstance may not sit right for you and yours, and that's okay. That's the whole point of building your own discernment instead of borrowing someone else's blanket morality. And not for nothing, just to add here before I wrap up talking about hoodoo and voodoo. Yes, there are things within those practices that cause harm. For protection, for justice, for things of that nature. It was all that these people had to protect themselves. But also, there are some really beautiful workings in them as well. Things that are joyful, things that are sacred and soft. So just to look at those practices as only baneful is also not giving credit where credit is due. I cannot tell you about all of the things that happen within those practices because that's not my place. If you want to learn about it, as I've said in many other episodes, I highly encourage you to find hoodoo or voodoo practitioners and learn from them directly and pay them for their knowledge because they deserve to be paid for their work, and let the people who these practices belong to decide what's allowed to be taught about and what isn't. But just know they are more complex, more well-rounded, and have many more things within them than just protections and hexing and baneful magic. I mentioned those practices here because it's what people first think of in our society these days when people say things like baneful magic, like quote unquote black magic. It's targeted at those communities. So, all right. Now that I'm off my soapbox, I promised some tangible things that you can walk away with today that come from open practices and that anybody can do. So let's get into that. These are open practice tools. They don't belong to any single closed tradition. They're part of a much wider cross-cultural lineage of folk magic that anyone can learn to work with respect and that continue to evolve every day in new and modern magic practices, because folk magic is the magic that evolves with the people. And that didn't stop at a certain point. It will continue to evolve and new practices will come. But these are some specific ones that can be helpful. Something we see a lot in New Age folk magic actually is the cord cutting. The one I'm speaking about here is different from ones that you may see on Instagram and on TikTok, and that is an example of how folk magic continues to grow and change and create new practices, because the cord cuttings that we see online these days with the candles with the strings tied around and they light the candles, the fire from the candles eventually burns those cords. That kind of a cord cutting is relatively actually new, and that's exactly how folk magic works, is it evolves. The cord cutting I'm mentioning is just something a little more simple and a more traditional cord cutting approach. It's a really gentle form of baneful magic, and a lot of people may have felt pulled towards doing one or something like it. For traditional cord cutting, you take the length of cord or ribbon. Something plain works fine, or red or black are common choices, but trust your instinct on what color works for you. You hold one end and visualize it connected to the person, habit, or situation you're releasing. Speak your intention out loud. Something as simple as, I release this tie, I claim what is mine, I return what is yours, and then you cut the cord in one clean motion. Some people burn the ends afterwards to seal the release. Some people bury the pieces. The point isn't in the fanciness of the ritual, it's the clarity of your intention and the finality of the cut. And there is even some debate online, because calling these candle spells that we see online cord cutting, because they're not really cutting, it's burning. Whereas I think there is something very empowering about holding the cord and physically cutting it yourself and making that intent. I think it is a very powerful feeling, even as simple as it is. And I would encourage people to try both ways and see what works best for you and what you feel more called to do. They're both valid. So next is the witch's ladder. The witch's ladder is a cord with knots tied into it, usually 9 or 13 knots. If you want to get really in depth, 40 knots. Each one is sealed with a breath and a word of intention. This can be built for protection, for binding a harmful pattern, or even for banishing. As you tie each knot, you're literally weaving your will into the cord. Traditionally, there's even a little chant that goes with it, something like, by knot of one, the spell's begun. Building up, knot by knot. It's a beautiful, tactile way to work baneful magic without feeling harsh. There's threshold protection. Your front door is one of the most spiritually significant boundaries that you have, and there's a whole world of folk practices built around guarding it. A simple line of salt across the threshold, iron, which has long been considered a repellent on unwanted energy, sometimes as a horseshoe hung above the door. I personally keep little iron nails above my doors. Protective herbs like rosemary or bay hung to dry near the entrance. None of this requires anything exotic or expensive. It just requires intention and consistency. There's candle magic for protection and release. And You pick a candle color that matches your intention. Black is traditional for banishing and absorbing negativity. Another example of how in mainstream media, when people are first learning about magic, they think black candles are something bad or sinister, but black candles are for protection and absorbing negativity. Though trust your own correspondence system too. That is whatever color calls to you and works for you. Carve a word or symbol into the wax representing what you're releasing or protecting against. Dress the candle with a small amount of oil, moving away from you if you're banishing. If you're calling something in, like protection, you can apply the oil moving towards you. Light it with clear intention and let it burn safely all the way down if you can. A fun one that is very historical is the witch's bottle. This one has real archaeological history behind it, dug up all over Britain for centuries. Traditionally, it's a jar filled with sharp objects, bent pins, nails, sometimes broken glass or thorns, along with something personal like hair or nail clippings of yours because you're the one to be protected. The idea is that harmful energy sent your way gets trapped in the bottle and reflected back to whoever sent it. These are traditionally buried under the threshold of the hearth of the home, or hang it in your garden or on a tree outside of your house. And these last two are a little bit more on the offense side rather than working defense. So use them if you feel called to. Don't if you don't. Make sure that it's something you really want to do, and use your best discernment. A common one a lot of people know of are the freezer jar, or sometimes called a timeout jar, which a timeout jar can go in the freezer or can be buried outside somewhere far away from your house. Don't leave it buried there forever. It's bad for the environment, but you're putting them in timeout and you want that energy to be kind of sealed off away from you. So bury it, remember where you bury it, kind of thing. But this one has real archaeological history behind it, dug up all over Britain for centuries. It's one of the most popular baneful workings in modern folk magic, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You write the name of a person or situation on a small piece of paper, fold it away from you, and drop into a jar of water or liquid of your choosing. Do with that what you will. Some people add vinegar or lemon juice for a souring effect. Some people add black pepper for a little bite. There's different baneful herbs that you can use. Pretty much anything can have a baneful intention if you want. A lot of people use rose for love, but you could also think of the fact that roses have thorns and use rose for a prickly energy, lover's scorned type vibe. One of my favorite things that a friend of mine told me she used was valerian root for impotence. Was an interesting one. So get creative, but use what you feel called to. These things are incredibly personal. And then screw the lid on tight. You can put it in your freezer, or again, you can go and bury it outside. But the freezing action is a big part of the spell because you're literally freezing someone's ability to act against you, slowing them down, icing out their influence. If you just leave them in a jar buried, they are just going to sit in that yuck. It doesn't really stop them from interacting with you. So, that's the difference there. Some people leave it in there indefinitely. Some set a specific time frame and then thaw it out once the situation has resolved. I've known people who will take it out, let it thaw, shake it up, put it back in. It depends on how mad you are at the person. It's simple, it's quiet, it's shockingly effective for the amount of effort it takes. Little note here. Anybody who has met my husband knows that he is a gentle, sweet, kind human being. He doesn't have a malicious bone in his body. And I am fiercely protective over him. I am the black cat to his golden retriever energy. And he came home with tears in his eyes from somebody being awful to him once upon a time. And they went in the freezer. And the very next day, upon going back to where he may have contact with the person, he told me that, oh gosh, I don't know if I should put this on the internet. Let's just say, no one was hurt, but the job site where the person who had made him cry, had to work that day was very soggy and uncomfortable due to some fire sprinklers going off in the middle of the night and the person still having to work at that job site. So, little things like that. And the person left my husband alone because he was too busy being uncomfortable in his own stuff that day, and my husband got to go work somewhere else. So, little things like that, where they can be simple and effective. And finally, another one is the compact mirror reflection spell. This one leans into the kind of reflect it back energy we touched on earlier, but this is for when you really want somebody to just focus on themselves, to leave you alone, to leave the people around them alone if they've been causing harm, and take some time and reflect on themselves and why they feel the need to be harmful to others. By trapping them in a compact mirror, you put a picture, their name, the intention, maybe sprinkle a little bit of herbs into the mirror, and then bind it with red or black thread or whatever you feel called to bind it with. And you put them in a timeout of self-reflection, essentially. The goal here is to maybe encourage some immense personal growth by having to just face themselves and do some shadow work and maybe even experience a taste of their own medicine. Or you can use the compact mirror as a return to sender in another way. You can speak your intention to it, something like what you send to me returns to you, doubled and undiminished, or just returns to you, and snap the compact shut like you're sealing the working inside. And that you can carry with you. If you are using the compact mirror as a ward and you're saying what you send to me returns to you, click, you can carry that with you as a ward. But if you are using it and sealing somebody inside of it and going more on the offensive route, I would recommend also putting it in a timeout box, putting it somewhere away from where you spend a lot of time. If you're going to do things that are on the offensive, we want to do them carefully, responsibly, cleanse ourselves afterwards, and make sure that energy is just kind of contained elsewhere to where you're not bumping up against it all the time. All of these tools you can start using whenever you're ready. And if something in you has been asking for release, protection, or justice, start small, start with clear intention. And that's really the whole secret anyways. I want to close the teaching part of this episode with something we've touched on before on the show because it matters just as much here as anywhere else. You have to develop your own personal code of ethics around your magic. Nobody can hand that to you fully built. There are religious practices like Wicca or Wiccan that have their own laws and ethics. And if that is where you're at on your journey and you are a practitioner of a specific religion, that's your journey. But, I'm more speaking to people who are developing their own paths without kind of getting into a pre-built organized religion. And if you are in a organized religion and some of the things they're saying don't call to you, it's okay to have your own views as well. Ask yourself, honestly, what you're comfortable with. Are you someone who only works protective magic, drawing firm boundaries and never initiating harm? Are you someone who believes certain harms justify a stronger response? There's no universally correct answer here, and I'd be lying to you if I pretended there was. I'd be lying to you if I even could say I have a concrete answer for myself all the time on that. My line kind of changes case by case basis. What matters is that you sit with it and you get honest with yourself and you build a practice that you can stand behind fully, not one that you are borrowing from someone else or because someone on TikTok told you have to believe this. And here's the flip side of that, which I think is just as important. Just because you land somewhere on the spectrum doesn't mean everyone else has to land there too. If you're someone who would never hex another person, no matter what they did, that's valid and a powerful choice. And I encourage you to stand on that. If that's how you feel, that's totally good. If you're someone who believes certain circumstances call for a harder response, that's valid. Your ethics are yours. Someone else's practices existing alongside yours, even if it looks different, doesn't threaten your own integrity. That's the sovereignty piece. Owning your path fully means allowing other people to own theirs. So as we come to the end of our time together today, I want you to sit for a moment with everything we've talked about. Baneful magic isn't a villain we've been taught to fear. It's boundary and it's release. It's sometimes the only justice available to people the world refused to protect. When you understand the history behind these practices, and when you understand what all of the different practices are and where they came from and why all of them deserve respect rather than reduction, you start to see the whole spectrum of magic differently. Less black and white, more human. Wherever you land on the spectrum is yours to decide, and yours alone. Trust the process of building your own discernment. Trust that your ancestors, whoever they are for you, already know how to protect what's yours. Before you go, as per usual, take some time with these journal prompts or reflection points, either right now or whenever you can carve out a quiet moment. Where in my life have I already practiced baneful magic without calling it that? What was I releasing, banishing, or protecting? What is my own personal line between protection and harm, and where did that line come from? Is there a hex, curse, or quote-unquote black magic stereotype I've absorbed from media that I'm ready to unlearn? If I imagine someone I love facing danger with no system to protect them, what would I want them to be allowed to do to protect themselves? How can practices within baneful magic teach me about setting boundaries? If any of this stirred something in you, come find me. I'd love to chat. I'd love to hear your takeaway, what stuck out for you, or if you have any deeper questions about any of these things. You can catch me at www.hexandhair.com, and I'm at Hex and Hair on both Instagram and TikTok. Come say hi. I'd love to hear where this episode took you. And until next week, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, and I can't wait to see you again on the crossroads. Bye!